Welcome to this week's assembly. Moses was born in Egypt, a time when the Israelites were slaves there. Pharaoh had given an order for the Egyptian army to kill all the newborn baby boys of the Israelites. But Moses' mum hid him for a little while, and when he got too big, he'd make a noise and so on, crying. He was too big to hide. She put him in a basket and put him on the River Nile, where he was rescued by the princess who adopted him. And so Moses lived as a prince in Egypt for 40 years. When he was 40, he killed an Egyptian slave driver that had been mistreating an Israelite slave because he got angry, and then he escaped in fear of his life. Moses then lived in the desert as a shepherd for 40 years until he was 80. When he was 80, God told him to go back to Pharaoh and tell Pharaoh to let all the Israelite slaves go. And so that's what Moses did, but Pharaoh wouldn't listen. And so God sent 10 plagues, each plague getting a bit worse. And on the evening of the 10th plague, Moses went to Pharaoh and said, let the people go. And he told Pharaoh exactly what would happen that night in the 10th plague. And it happened as Moses said, and it was so bad that Pharaoh said to Moses, take those slaves away, I never want to see them again. And so Moses led about 2 million Israelite slaves out of Egypt. A little while later, Pharaoh changed his mind because he realized he'd let all his slaves go. Who was going to do the work of building the buildings and the pyramids and the houses for the Egyptians? So he sent his army after them. So imagine the Israelite people walking through the desert. In front of them, they've got the Red Sea, and behind them, they've got the Egyptian army coming in the distance. So they were trapped. They were scared and they were afraid. What would they do? What would you do? Surrender to Pharaoh's army or try to swim across the Red Sea and probably drown? Well, they didn't really do anything, but they moaned at Moses and said, it's your fault. You brought us out into this desert to die. We'd have been better off in Egypt. Moses said, don't be afraid. Just stand firm. God will fight for you today. He will defeat the army and you will then be free and not be slaves anymore. All you've got to do is be still. And then God sent a cloud in between the Israelites and the Egyptians. And on the Israelite side of the cloud, it was still light. But on the Egyptian side of the cloud, it was dark, so they couldn't move forward. And it gave Israel time to get to the Red Sea. Then what would happen? You might know what happened next. Well, Moses held up his stick towards the Red Sea, and this happened. I've got a little plate of water here, a little saucer of plate of water, and I'm going to tip some pepper on it. Don't know if you can see that. Hopefully you can. And so, as Moses lifted up his stick or his staff over the sea, the sea separated, just like our pepper trick. And so there was a wall of sea one side and a wall of sea the other side. And so the Israelites just walked through on dry land. When they got to the other side of the sea, the cloud lifted and the Egyptian army came forward. Moses then lifted his stick like that. And as the Egyptian army crossed, the sea covered back over. And so they were drowned. And then the Israelite people were completely and really free. What had seemed impossible to the Israelites a few moments ago now happened. They were completely free, the other side of the Red Sea, away from Egypt. Now, Moses was an inspirational leader. He led the Israelites for another 40 years through the desert into a land that God had promised them. Although he faced lots of difficulties over those 40 years, especially with a lot of the Israelites kept moaning about him, criticizing him, grumbling about him, he kept going. And that's a story for us to keep going in the things that we need to do. And as we persevere, we keep going, we don't give up, we may well then be an inspiration to other people. Christians believe that the same God who rescued slaves from Egypt, the slaves from Pharaoh, is the God that they can trust today. When our friends let us down, we feel anxious and afraid, when we've got difficulties to face, when life doesn't turn out how we think it should, Christians believe we can always put our trust in God, who always has a plan for us to help us. Just as he was looking after the Israelite slaves, he's looking after us too. And no matter what we face in our lives, what struggles you're having at school, keep going. You can do it, you can get through, and there's always other people to help you. Right, I'm going to say a little prayer now, and then we'll have a quiz. I think the quiz is quite hard, so let's see how well you were listening. If you like my prayer, you can say amen and make it yours. Dear God, thank you for saving the Israelites. Thank you for showing us in big ways and in small ways that you're powerful. Remind us that when we feel afraid or confused, you are there to help us. And Lord, just as Moses kept going when he faced difficulties, help us to keep going when we're facing difficulties and problems, and perhaps people are not being very nice to us. Help us to keep going and keep focused on what it is that we need to do. Amen. Okay, question number 1. Who brought Moses up? Who adopted him and brought him up? Number 2, how old was Moses when he led Israel out of Egypt? Number 3, what did Pharaoh do after he allowed the Israelite slaves to leave Egypt? What did he then do? Number 4, God sent a cloud between the Egyptians and the Israelites. What happened? What was it like on the different sides? Number 5, what happened to the Red Sea? Number 6, what happened to the Egyptians? Number 7, how many plagues were there in Egypt? And the final question is, how many years was Moses a prince in Egypt? That's quite hard, have a think. Anyway, let me give you the answers. Number 1, the princess brought Moses up. Number 2, Moses was 80 when he led Israel out of Egypt. Number 3, what did Pharaoh do after the Israelites had left? He changed his mind and sent his army after them, or he chased them. Number 4, what happened when God sent the cloud in between the army and the Israelites? It was light on Israel's side, dark on Egypt's side. Number 5, what happened to the Red Sea? It parted, didn't it? Just like our trick. with a pepper. Number 6, what happened to the Egyptians? The sea came back over and covered them up. Well, they drowned. Number 7, how many plagues were there? There were 10. And how many years did Moses live as a prince in Egypt? It was 40. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed our assembly today. I hope you liked our little trick, and I hope to see you all soon. Bye. Bye.